For many of us, we are familiar with jigsaw puzzles. We generally tip out the pieces and initially sort them to be face up, possibly in similar shape, and start to find the corners and the edge pieces. We may start to familiarise ourselves with the image on the box as we form our puzzle's border, while we begin to find similar colours and shapes to resemble what we believe we are creating. Our brain looks for rationale, routine, and regularity. We are programmed to look for the obvious and make presumed logical connections before we have all the pieces, or even in their absence. How frustrating and confronting must it be if the pieces we have just don't quite fit to complete the image we've already logically determined and decided it simply must be. If you think you have all the pieces needed to complete this puzzle, then stop and think again, as we reveal the real image on the box of the death of Phil Walsh here on the next episode of Just Lawful.
Adelaide is the perfect place to set a horror story. You know why all those films and books are always set in sleepy conservative towns? Because sleepy conservative towns are where those things happen. Exorcism, omens, shining, poltergeists. Adelaide is Amityville or Salem, and things here go bump in the night.
Welcome again to Just Lawful, where things do indeed go bump in the night. My name is Daniel Panozzo, and I am once again, as always, joined by my co-host, Sean Fuster.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks to all our listeners.
Indeed, thank you to all of our listeners. A huge thank you to everyone who has listened either on the broadcast here at 5AA, or you've caught the show through our podcast on either iTunes or Spotify. As always, if you haven't heard our previous episodes, we would greatly appreciate and strongly recommend you heading straight over to one of those platforms. Subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating, review, all of those things. That's how you help get our work out to the masses and to those people who could really use it, and how you can catch up on the journey so far.
And hasn't it been a journey, and haven't there been some responses so far?
I'm glad you mentioned that, Sean, because I wanted to take a moment just to talk about that. Some of the responses we've had, there's been a couple of episodes in this series, around the death of Phil Walsh and certainly his son Si as well, as we start to unpack that. I'm going to start off by saying it's been intriguing and probably not necessarily surprising, some of the initial response we've had and some of the, I'll say, public figures that have actually reached out to us in that sense. I will also say it's been quite refreshing and very, very, justifying that they've since also, some of them have started to change their initial stance, or said they've actually learnt something or seen something or started to think about this in a different light.
And that's all we're really trying to do here. We want to give people the information so that you can come to an informed opinion about this. There's going to be a lot of you out there that will disagree with us by the time we've finished this. There'll be some of you that might have changed your minds. Either way, we're grateful you're listening. We're grateful that you're telling us how you're thinking and feeling as we roll all of this out. And it'll be fascinating to see where we all end up at the end of it.
Agreed. I couldn't agree with that more, Sean. And to your point, whether you agree, disagree, like what we say, don't, whether we've helped you understand more or we've frustrated you, that's okay, because it helps to create a platform where we can have a conversation, and that's where we can get true value and meaning and the real concept of what can we learn from this situation.
Absolutely.
Before we go any further, really quickly, as always, if anything you hear through these episodes does spark some concern, if you find anything distressing, or you have someone you know who's in a vulnerable mental state, please make use of the following resources, whether it's here locally or please find those in your local area. For us here, obviously the South Australian Government Mental Triage Health Service on 131 465, the Acute Crisis Intervention Support Line on 131 466. They are just a couple of those services. There are many out there, as I say, whether you're here locally or in your own area. Please, if you need, reach out and get that support for yourself or those loved ones around you.
To bring you back up to speed at where we are right now, we are still on September 16, 2015, as yours truly is digging through 7 photocopier paper boxes full of all of the documentation known to that point in the death of Phil Walsh. Material that normally a journalist would never get to see. Material that would normally not be released. However, the Adelaide Magistrates Court had released this information to me, and I was sitting in the ground floor registry trying to note as much of it as I could, as inconspicuously as I could, so that the rest of the media didn't see what I was up to and start asking for the documents as well. And Daniel, we've talked about this. We've divided all of this information, these thousands and thousands of pages, into 3 artificial categories. You made the comparison at the top of the show to putting together a jigsaw puzzle. That's what I was doing. I was trying to figure out what's an edge piece, what's a flat piece, where's the table or the vase of flowers in this metaphor. We are at the point now where I'm looking at the documentation that is about the final 36 hours of Phil Walsh's life, and more particularly, what he and Cy were doing over those 36 hours.
It's going to be fascinating as we unpack that. There is one small point before you go any further. You've almost kind of buried the lead, and it's something you know I'm really passionate about. And we will, not right now, because there's something more important. We will come back and touch on this. You received this documentation that normally you wouldn't have received.
Yeah.
And in a situation that others hadn't been aware was being made public at that point. And I will absolutely come back and touch on that point down the track. That's a point that really needs to be expanded upon. Not only the fact that you received these documents when normally you wouldn't, but to your credibility about the understanding of this case and what that truly meant. And I guess the way, and I'm going to state it right now, you were perhaps some of the opposition you faced in your telling of this story and your opinion, as those around you perhaps didn't have those facts, however, were very, very vocal in their position around that. So, as I say, that's almost a bury the lead thing. I'm going to at some point come back and we're going to expand upon that. As you said, though, right now we are going to move into sort of, as you said, the third part of the segmentation of these documents. And this is about the last 36 hours of Phil Walsh's life, and also the last 36 hours that Cy went through leading up to that incident.
Pulling this all together was a very fraught experience, because you've heard in our previous 2 episodes bits and pieces about the relationship between father and son, and also about the previously unknown Perth incident, Greylands as we started calling it. This information here was in the same sorts of documents, so there's a lot of going backwards and forwards trying to figure out what goes with what. But the reconstruction of the final 36 hours begins with Sharon Watt. Sharon Watt is the wife of Graham Watt. We've heard that the Watts were family friends of the Walshes. So let's take you to what Sharon Watt said about the events of Wednesday, July 1st, 2015. She said Cy Walsh turned up on her doorstep wanting to speak to her. And when he did, he said, "My father's told me I'll never be good enough to play AFL." He became quite agitated. So Mrs. Watt said, "Cy, calm down, just sit down, let me get you a cup of tea." He says, "I'm going to get a knife and I'm going to stab him." And he was making a stabbing motion with his right arm, bringing it from about head height down about 3 or 4 times. He said, "I just want to get him and stab him and cut his heart out. Don't tell anyone." What a thing to put on someone.
Indeed. That is a lot, Sean. It's okay to be angry. We understand that, and we know that Cy had a knee issue that perhaps would stop that. He's clearly upset and agitated at his father telling him he's not going to be good enough. But what a thing to act out.
Well, if that's even happened. That's the thing. Okay. You've got to remember all the other statements we've talked about where everyone had said to a man, to a woman, Phil didn't care about that.
Yeah.
He didn't care if Cy played AFL or not. He just wanted Cy to be happy.
Okay.
So
in Cy's mind, this has happened.
There you go. Okay. And that's what I'm grappling with at this point as I'm writing this down.
Sure.
Did this actually happen? Is there another document somewhere that attests to this conversation? No, there's nothing.
Okay.
For all we know, this is just Cy's belief at this point.
To your point, though, what a heavy thing to put on someone, to tell them you're going to stab your father, act it out with that sort of emotion, and then immediately say, "But don't tell anyone about this conversation."
Of course, Mrs. Watt didn't do that. She rang Cy's mother, Meredith, almost as soon as Cy left the house, which is fair enough.
Sure.
So Mrs. Walsh, Meredith Walsh, says that Mrs. Watt called her and said, "Cy's taken something. He looks like he's off his tree. That manic sort of look, that bizarre look on his face. He actually said something crazy to her about his father, about how he wanted to rip his father's heart out." So Meredith tried to contact Cy, got a text message back saying, "I know the truth. I need a few days to myself."
Okay.
What truth?
And okay, I was going to say almost cryptic, but almost, what does that actually mean?
Well, answers were forthcoming in someone else's statement.
Okay.
So Cy's friend, Stephen Trobiani, received a call from Cy Walsh Can I stay at your house? I've had an argument with Dad. I need someone to stay. Mr. Trobbiani says, yep, you can stay for as long as you need. My brothers and my sister are here as well. There's a statement from Mr. Trobbiani's sister, Laura, who says that Walsh spent some of the time at their home drafting a 6-line text message poem to his father and asked her to have a look at it. She said, it didn't make much sense to me. It seemed a bit strange. The only line I remember was something along the lines of, without Phil Walsh, the crows will fall. I got the impression he was complimenting his dad, but it was a bit antagonistic at the same time.
Okay, this is starting to evolve into a very strange landscape.
So the text message was actually there in amongst the bundle of documents.
Okay.
The full text message.
Right.
This is what it reads. It is your duty to pump up your troops. It is your duty to win. But honesty is key. War needs to be a thrill. War can be fun. War should not focus on brutality. If Phil Walsh should fall, the crows will experience many years of darkness. I cannot forgive your sins. There is a master in Peru who can. Please focus on hope and remember to put your family before yourself.
Okay.
Ominous doesn't begin to approach
Sure.
that set of messages.
So many lines of just questioning that for me. I'm not sure what to think about that right now.
Well, add in what we know from what we've talked about so far. We know what Peru's all about. That was the incident with the bus where Phil was injured. And we know that Sai has been talking about warriors and, you know, the great and noble connection between father and son.
Yeah.
We know that he's thinking about the apocalypse. He thought the world was going to end at the Bliss and Esso concert. So there's that apocalyptic kind of feel in here. Remember also there were some claims that Sai thought that maybe the crows were starting to figure out that Phil's ideas were actually Sai's ideas. You remember that?
I do remember you vaguely mentioning something around that, yeah.
There's a bit of that in there as well. You know, I know the truth. It's your duty to do this. It's your duty to do that. With everything that I'd read to that point, it's not that I understood this text message.
Yeah.
It's that I could see the connective tissue, for want of a better term. It felt like to me, reading it at the time, that this was a culmination of everything that had been happening to that point.
I'm going to be honest, Sean, it does feel a lot like you've got a pinboard and you've got your red string and you're pulling those parts together. How you pull those together and what the response from this was and where we go from here is just fascinating.
I cannot forgive you your sins. There is a master in Peru who can. Please focus on hope and remember to put your family before yourself. Those are the final lines of Sai Walsh's text message poem to his father a couple of days before he killed his father. Daniel, if you received a text message like that from someone, how would you react? How would you feel?
It's an interesting question, Sean. And for me, got to put context to this. If I received that from someone that I wasn't expecting it from or out of the blue, I'd be a little interested, concerned, confused, what's going on? If this was my son of 20-something years and over the last year or couple of years I'd seen a change and this is, dare I say, not necessarily unusual behaviour, however it's slightly out of the norm, I'm not sure how I'd respond. I think me personally, I'd absolutely be curious. As a father, I'd probably be quite almost concerned and wanting to understand what is going on. Are you in trouble? Are you? What's happening for you to be doing this? I need to try and understand that so I can, if I can offer help as a father, that's what I'd be wanting to do.
I was interested to know because unfortunately Phil's response to that text is lost to time. There was a response according to the document that I was reading.
Okay.
But there was no record within it of what Phil's response was. Instead, there was Sai's response to Phil's reply.
Okay, so Phil responded. We don't know what that is. We do have a response from Sai back to that, though.
Sai texted back, "Are the people around you yes men? Are they snakes? Or are they men of honesty?"
Okay. I wouldn't even be able to hazard a guess as to what Phil's response might have been to elicit that response.
Now, at this point, of course, Mrs. Watts has already made the comparison that Sai's off his face, manic, bizarre. They believe that he's taken something.
Yes.
And you would with that sort of message.
Yeah.
So that meant that the Wattses, of course, went to the Walsh house. So all 4 adults could sit down and sort of try to figure out what to do from here. Graham Watts, in his statement, says that his wife said, "We need to go over there and we need to prompt Phil to talk about the issues with Cy."
Okay.
Graham was not interested in doing that. Did not want to have that conversation, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't feel comfortable.
Understandable. You almost do want to get involved in someone else's personal life to that point with their child. Understandable.
We all have different lines in different friendships. There are some people that I will take advice from. There are some people that I won't. You're in the category that I will. But other people we know, if they wanted to talk to me about my issues in my family, I'd say, no, it's none of your business.
Exactly.
Graham felt that that wasn't a line he wanted to cross. Nevertheless, needs mean that he did it. And he said he sat down next to his old friend. He describes it as a cold environment. I told Phil we were just here to help, but he wasn't interested in talking and said, "There's not much you can do." I asked him how he coaches football and deals with all of these issues at the same time. He looked down and shrugged. Defeated.
Yeah, almost dismissive. Not dismissive, submissive to the fact that it just is what it is.
Yeah.
Harsh.
That's the end of events as far as the witness statements had it for Wednesday, July 1.
Okay.
So we move to Thursday, July 2. Very next day, and we've got an entry in Cy's mobile phone calendar where he wrote, "You might find my presence an incredible test. Please don't be hard on yourself if you didn't pass. Soon someone will call your name. My contribution is a small offering of prayer backed up by the human emotion of pure rage." I tell you, when I read that, I was really concerned when I read that.
Yeah, if you don't pass, like my presence is a test. If you don't pass it, don't feel bad. Someone's going to call your name. My contribution is a small offering of prayer backed up by the human emotion of pure rage.
Pure rage.
Okay, that's quite strong, isn't it?
This is not the same frame of mind that Cy was in Perth, where father and son coming together was a moment of angelic bliss, and afterwards it was like Fight Club, and I'm proud of my dad for being able to stand his ground against me, even though he's much older. This is anger, pure rage. On his blog, he posted a photo of a shirtless sword-wielding man, and he wrote, "Incredible, what is the magic? It appears that the father and son will find true forgiveness. I cannot be sure, but it feels unfathomable." So on one electronic device, he's saying pure rage. On the other, he's saying forgiveness. We're back to that kind of Perth mentality again. All in the space of a couple of minutes. Erratic is the word. There's a discontinuity of thought and emotion going on here.
Yeah.
It's all focused on Phil, but there's no consistency to it.
Yeah.
Except the obsessive nature of it being about his father. Mr. Trobiani comes back into our story at this point.
Okay.
9:22 a.m, he receives text messages from Cy Walsh saying, quote, "Mum incoming with the G-men at me," end quote, and quote, "help, help, help," end quote. The G-men, it's a fairly common delusion. Men in black, government agents come and get me, cars, things like that. Very common. That's backed up by the statement of Meredith Walsh, who says that she and Mrs. Watt went to Mr. Trobiani's home because Walsh had sent that bizarre poem to his dad. She describes it as, "It was something about a man in Peru that we all needed to go see, and the crows as well. I said to Phil, look, I'm going to go around, and you know the best scenario would be if you call an ambulance and they restrained him and we got him." So at this point, Meredith Walsh is prepared to call in the help.
Yeah, absolutely.
The G-men.
The G-men, absolutely, yeah.
She and Mrs. Watt drove to Mr. Trobiani's house and found Walsh, this is her description, quite manic and off his face, even though he had said he had had no drugs. Cy told his mother, "Oh, you're not sending in the G-men. You know you don't hospitalise me. Don't cage me up." He was agitated and he was waving his arms. So she said to Mrs. Watts, "Let's leave. He's trying to intimidate us." Good idea. Back down, de-escalate.
Sure.
But that's when Cy got suddenly excited and hyped up, saying he had been given the gift of creativity.
Right.
That prompted Meredith to call 000. Sorry, I apologise. It prompted Mrs. Watt to call 000. And fair enough too. Remember, She's heard everything to this point.
Absolutely, yeah.
But as she's dialing 000, Sai runs at her, pushes her, causes her to stumble, and then runs off. Which means that the women then go to the police station. They speak to Senior Constable Tyson Mobbs at the Glenelg Police Station. He called Sai on his mobile phone to try to talk to him, and Sai just hung up. Here's the bit that broke my heart. I mean, that's underselling it. A lot of this has broken my heart. Here's the moment that we've talked about coronial inquests before. We've talked about moments where you look back and you go, if someone had done something just a little different at this point, maybe the outcome would have been different. Senior Constable Mobbs spoke to his superiors, saying that he wanted to attempt triangulation of the mobile telephone. He wanted to track the phone.
Absolutely. Find the location of where Sai may have been at that moment.
Fantastic idea.
Yeah.
Find Sai, get him to somewhere he needs help, find out what's going on. His superiors denied him permission to do so, saying the situation does not meet the criteria for such a procedure.
Yeah, okay. That is one of those moments, as you say, Sean, where if someone had have made a different decision in that moment, how could we have altered the outcome? Because everything you've said so far about Meredith and Mrs. Watt going to see him at his friend's house and that interaction, to her point, he seemed off his face even though he says he has no drugs. The manic behaviour, the things he was saying, I'm going to dare to say it does sound like some sort of episode, whether it is drug-induced or whether it is psychosis-induced. It does certainly sound like there is an episode happening. As you say, at this moment, if we make this decision, and I'm not sure what criteria they use to determine what does or doesn't qualify for their triangulation of that, if we could have done that, could we have perhaps found Sai at that point and maybe been able to restrain him?
And if Senior Constable Mobbs is listening right now, great idea. It's a shame that it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And for those officers who made the decision, I hope that they're doing okay, because this is the sort of decision that would haunt you later.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to assign any blame here. I'm not looking to throw anybody under the bus.
No.
It's one of those moments where I'm sure those officers looked back immediately afterwards and went, damn it, why didn't we just...
If we could have only.
If we could have only. So I feel for you guys as well. Mr. Trobiani was then called by Meredith. She's trying to get help wherever she can. And she says, look, I need you. I know Sai's talking to you. Will you just do the right thing and help me out? Mr. Trobiani does what we would ask any of our friends to do. He says, look, I don't believe committing Sai is the best option. I believe that drug use has done some permanent damage to change Sai's personality.
Yeah.
He also said, I'll definitely help you, but I can't promise you that I'll call you if I speak to Sai, because I don't want to lie to Sai, and especially not at this time when he's going through whatever he's going through.
Yeah.
I want to support him.
Yeah.
Again, good friend.
I think so, and quite a balanced approach. I think he's quite right. In his sort of assertion here that he feels that drug use had done some permanent damage or altered his psyche in some way. Also to say that, as you said, really good friend, I'll help you. I'm not going to lie to Sai about this though.
What we've got is a lot of people who care very deeply for the welfare of Sai Walsh, trying to find the least invasive and the least confronting manner.
I think confronting's the one, isn't it?
For want of a better term, bring him down. Yeah. And literally down is in lower the level.
Absolutely. De-escalate that.
De-escalate.
How do we get him to a point of calm that we can understand what's happening and then start to take some steps to rectify that?
And reading all of this as I was, in the wake of what I knew was coming, it's so damn sad.
Yeah.
There's nothing but good intentions here. There is nothing but kindness and thought and love in all of this. And it's just leading to an inexorable end that has already happened from my timeline perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm just watching it unfold. And I can't fault any of these people in that moment. Reading these documents post-death, I still can't fault anybody for this. Yeah. Everyone's trying their hardest, including Paul Kramberger, another high school friend of Sai's. He got a phone call from Sai during the day. He said Sai seemed very calm and very spaced out. Sai told me, I think I've won the game. I've won the game. I've transcended myself.
So at that point, Sai believes he's got to a point of, as you said, transcending himself, moving beyond that, whether that is a physical, mortal perspective, whatever that might be. That's, again, just that next step, as I said, and goes back to that, whatever episode he was having, and however that's been created, whether that has been through drug usage, which has had some altered state permanently, or is at this stage, we don't know, is Sai on something, to go through this process, to get to this point, and to have all these people trying to do their best to look after Sai and find Sai to try to de-escalate this, as you said, is a sad, sad situation where we know where this actually leads to.
While Cy Walsh is telling his friend that he's transcended the game, Phil Walsh is making calls about the game, as in AFL.
Okay.
He makes a call to Rob Snowden, who is Port Adelaide's general manager at the time. And in his statement, Mr. Snowden says, Phil asked me if he could bounce some ideas off me, and I also had some ideas I wanted to talk to him about. Normal, general business conversation. He also said he wanted to talk to me about Cy, but he didn't go into detail. I didn't get the impression that it was anything serious, as Phil sounded normal. Now, he may have sounded normal to Mr. Snowden, but Meredith Walsh says that she was contacted by her husband, who said he'd spoken to and located Cy in Glenelg.
Okay.
There's no other record of this conversation, how this happened, but somehow Phil had managed to track Cy down. So Meredith and Mrs. Watts drove straight to the location, somewhere in Glenelg. I told Cy, you know you're being really bizarre, Meredith says. And Cy replied, look, I will go in and be assessed for a week if that's what you want me to do. You know I won't take any drugs, and I'll give you what I've got. She says he was totally normal. I suppose that may be the disease or the illness or whatever was affecting him. So, of course, they went back to the police station because at this point the police are looking for Cy.
Yeah.
So they need to cancel that sort of missing persons style notice. They speak to Senior Constable Philip Downs, and he gives in his statement, I asked if Meredith was going to take Cy to the Flinders Medical Centre. She replied no, they would have a family discussion and make a decision then. I asked Cy if he was all right. He replied yes and was smiling. I asked him again, and he replied that he was all right and was still smiling.
It certainly sounds like a departure as such from the previous episode we talked about. And although he's still stating his case, I'm not taking drugs, I don't want to be put away, he's starting to make some shift in that almost compromise of, okay, if you want me to get it checked out, well, I will do that. That seems very different and far less, I guess, aggressive or adamant than he had been previously.
And it's certainly not Greylands over again, is it?
No.
Much calmer. And that was borne out by a phone call that Jenny Finch, Meredith's sister, received from Meredith. Meredith told me that Cy had not been himself lately and was very agitated. She said he went missing and the police were involved. Meredith said she thought Cy had a mental problem and needed help. She said she spoke to Cy and he said he was going to get help.
Well, it's interesting there because even Meredith was saying, I'm not sure, is it the illness or the disease? So at some point, there's some recognition, and again, we hear it here, that perhaps we understand there is something ongoing, not just drug use here.
Minds are open.
Yes.
It's not, as you say, just drug use. It's not Cy's off on ayahuasca again. He's off his face.
Absolutely.
He's off his head. Maybe there's something more. Whether that's something that Meredith has come to herself or whether Mr. Trobiani's statement about the personality alteration has struck home.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, everybody involved in this situation at this point, we're just hours away from the stabbing.
They're recognising there's a change, a shift, something different.
Something deeper going on here. Now, Meredith's statement, this is hard. Okay. This is really hard. Meredith says that when they got home, there was a joyous, healing family reunion.
Okay.
Meredith and Cy waited at home. Phil walked in the door. And she says, they just hugged each other and told each other they loved each other. Cy told his dad he was sorry.
Okay.
It's such a nice image.
Well, it's what you want that family cohesion, that family unit to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but they all sat down to have dinner and Meredith says that Cy went a bit strange. He said, everything will be okay, Dad. With everything that has happened in Greece, the world has reset. Now, for those who don't remember their history, the Greek financial crisis was around this time.
Yeah.
Cy went on to say, but what you need to do, because it's going to happen here, we need to buy lots of gold and get lots of cash out of the ATMs, and then we will be okay.
Okay, it's strange to plot those things together, but how the crisis in Greece is going to affect us or the world is being reset because of it. And his solution is get rich, cash, gold, that sort of thing.
He transcended the game, remember?
Okay.
Maybe this is what he thought
Sure.
he'd done. He'd had a new realization, a new level of consciousness.
Far beyond that of the rest of us, clearly, yeah.
Phil sort of dismissed this, Meredith says, and said, okay, and walked to the couch and sat down. He said, okay, look, mate, just come down and sit with me. Cy went a bit strange again about that and said, no, 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 no. Meredith doesn't recount what happened next, but both men left the house, Cy and Phil. Cy called Mr. Trobbiani and asked to be picked up. Mr. Trobbiani says, Cy said that his dad was a member of a multifaceted organisation, and Cy has voiced similar conspiracy theories to me on other occasions. By this stage, I was a little more concerned about Cy's mental state as becoming more irrational. He sounded agitated, saying the Adelaide Football Club had found out that some of Phil's ideas had come from Cy, there's that reference again, and now they were searching for who came up with the original ideas. The conversation didn't make much sense and Cy was rambling a bit. I got the impression that Cy thought he was the genius behind his dad's coaching ideas. He also said that the AFL is run by the Illuminati. Yeah, the look on your face says everything.
Well, I'm just putting together some red string strands myself, and I've transcended the game. I now know the truth. The truth is I've been the mastermind behind this. My dad's actually been using my ideas for the Crows. That's been the success. The Crows organisation, which is that multifaceted organisation, which is run by the Illuminati, has now got wind of that. Suddenly there's a whole shift here. Look, it's somewhat, I don't know, concerning for myself that I'm starting to pull this together. However, that's the vibe or the feel I'm starting to get from what Cy is saying here, that the truth is coming out, things are changing, the Illuminati is at foot here, and they're recognising that Cy's the genius, not Phil.
And these are very common signs of disordered mind, of schizophrenic thought, of paranoid delusions. They're also signs of massive drug abuse.
Yeah.
And having done yourself in with LSD and hallucinogens.
That permanent mental state alteration.
So again, back in time, we're still not sure. There's still a line ball call which way this is going to go. Has he taken something that has given him these concepts? Has he left Mr. Trobbiani's care and taken something? Or is this a continuing descent into mental illness?
Yeah.
Phil Walsh went to Graham Watts' house.
Okay.
He got there about 6:30 at night. And Mr. Watts says that turning up like that without warning was uncharacteristic, as was Phil's choice of attire. He says Phil was wearing his full Crows outfit, which he would never wear unless he was on his way to or from work.
Okay.
Phil said he just needed to get out of the house and that Cy was agitated with him. He didn't say why. Mr. Watts said Phil recounted the dinner conversation, showed him the text message poem, and said that I believe Cy's referencing when I got hit by a bus in Peru. Graham Watts says, it said that they had to go back to get things healed, and once they did, Phil would be the messiah of the Crows.
Okay.
I've said a couple of times we've hit a sad point.
Yeah.
But we've hit a really sad point now because the last reference to Phil Walsh being alive in these documents is that comment about him being the messiah of the Crows. Because what comes next are the events of Friday, July 3rd, 2015, the early hours of the morning, where, as we know from what we've already talked about in this series so far, Cy uses a knife to kill Phil Walsh. We are not going to go back over that statement again. I don't think anybody needs to live through that a third time.
If you want to, you can go back and listen to that on the previous episodes.
Of course, we know Cy left the house, had the encounter with the taxi driver. There was the conversation about the blood on him.
Yeah.
The taxi driver wouldn't give him a lift. And then eventually the police tracked him down. He said, you know, my father's alive. No, your father has died. Oh my God. And started saying, I'm hearing voices. While all that was going on, while the police were interviewing Cy Walsh, news of his father's death started to get out to the public. One of the first people to call Meredith was Kane Corns, one of the greats of the Port Adelaide Football Club. He says in his statement, Meredith confirmed that Phil had passed away, and she said that Cy had a psychotic episode. I'd never had much to do with Cy. I would see him occasionally when I was visiting, but I wouldn't really interact with him. After his arrest, Cy was conveyed to the Flinders Medical Centre, where Dr. Paul Camel gave him a full psychiatric evaluation. As far as we know from the evidence, this is the first psychiatric evaluation that Cy has had since Greylands.
Okay.
Now remember, Greylands was a preliminary diagnosis.
Sure. Approximately 12 months beforehand?
Approximately 12 months before. Dr. Camel says that Walsh was agitated, with a bandaged forehead due to banging his head deliberately against a wall. He wrote, "It's clear that he's floridly psychotic. This is evidenced by the fact he exhibits bizarre posturing and is behaviourally disorganized. He displays pronounced thought disorder and delusions of control, including beliefs that remote computers and spiritual energies are controlling his brain." Reading that sent me back to Meredith Walsh's statement.
Yep.
And she says at the conclusion of her statement that she suspected for a while that her son had some sort of paranoia, personality disorder, or schizophrenia. When he has these paranoid feelings or emotions, the venom that comes out of his mouth toward his father is horrendous, and for no reason, she wrote. I don't know where that comes from.
Well, that tips back to, if we remember, the social media messaging he was putting out about his own psyche, where at one point he would be telling people he loved them and felt so attached to them, and then immediately at other times he would be in other people's faces, just wanting to pick fights with them out of nowhere. That aggression, that hatred.
He knew that about himself.
Absolutely. So to Meredith's point, that's actually, I guess if we expand that from what we can see, isn't that unusual in this sense. And he even said when he offered that prayer, but it was backed up by pure rage as well. So there is definitely that picture forming around that. To your point around that concept of it is, a really sad point that as far as the documentation goes, that is the last reference to Phil Walsh being alive, was that statement that if they could go back to Peru and they could rectify whatever needed to happen there, Phil would come back and he would be the Messiah of the Crows. It's almost quite ironic, and in the most darkest, horrible ways, that rather than that Messiah of the Crows, his son almost turned him into the martyr of the Crows at the same time. We've just gone through, and for the want of those listening and myself, we've had the benefit of Sean doing the heavy lifting here, because as he said by himself, what you've heard up to this point over the last 2.5, 3 episodes is 7 boxes of documents that he had to handwrite notes for and go through and try to make some sense for. And I made the comment earlier about a puzzle and trying to piece it together. Sean, with no image to actually follow, trying to put these pieces together, and dare I say, with a huge amount of cramp in your hand from having to take notes, you've spent the entire day in an office in the courtrooms transcribing this 7 boxes. What on earth is that like for you, if you can go back to that and think about where were you at mentally at the end of this day?
Drained is too small a word. I've put it together for all of you in 3 categories. But I was taking notes. I just took all of Meredith Walsh's statement, all of Stephen Trobiani's statement, all of the medical statements, just page after page after page, mentally making notes, little asterisks, trying to remind myself what connected to what as I saw the connective tissue flow. But my hand was killing me. I'm aching. If I hadn't run out of a pen, I reckon I'd broken a pen or both, filled a notebook. My strongest memory of the end of the whole process is the feeling of fingertips touching cardboard as there were no more documents in that 7th box.
Yeah, right.
That scratchy noise of your fingertips on cardboard. That's the mental image and the scent memory that I get, I was struggling. I was really struggling because I had read all of this and I still didn't know why it had happened.
Yeah.
I was no longer of any doubt in my mind that Cy Walsh had done it, but I didn't know why. Was he mentally ill? Was he on drugs? Was it something else?
That's fascinating for me, and I want to come back to that feeling of the end of that 7th box in a moment. You've spent the first 24 hours of this story evolving. You've sat in that courtroom in the afternoon, sat there all day waiting for it to be over in mere minutes of no one in the courtroom. We know that bizarre situation. There was no defendant, no defense counsel in there. To now actually come back the next day to do this, and still at this point, as you said, not know why.
Yeah.
That must have been, as you said, like how, I don't know, were you frustrated? Were you concerned, confused? Just what was that feeling like?
You remember the old man of the sea? Water everywhere and not a drop to drink?
Yeah.
This was all the information I could possibly want at my fingertips and no connective context.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Congratulations. You actually have everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. We're not going to give you an instruction book on how to put this together.
Yeah.
But you've got everything.
Yeah.
Choke on it. And I was choking on it.
Yeah.
Choking on it is the sensation.
Yeah,
I
right.
did not know what to do with this information because this early on in the game, like you say, we had that very brief appearance.
Sure.
Then we had the other appearance a month or so later. Then they give me access to the documentation. The most I know is that they've taken the hair sample away for a toxicology test.
Yeah.
How do I use this in a lawful manner to get back to the thesis of this program?
Yep.
I'm sitting there thinking things like, all right, if Cy pleads not guilty
Yeah.
and it's not a mental health case, then this is going to go to a trial.
Sure.
And all of this information that I've just read may or may not be led before a jury. So should I report it or shouldn't I report it?
So what's implication? If you report it and it has to go before a jury, what's implication there?
The idea is that all of you out there are potential jurors. You would know everything that I now know, so you're going to walk into that jury box with a predetermined notion.
Right, so you could be prejudicing the trial process by releasing this if it then goes to trial.
I could publish this information at that point, September 16, 2015, and make it absolutely impossible for Cy Walsh to have a fair trial.
Right.
But at the same time, he may not have a trial. He may be found not guilty by reason of mental incompetence. So why am I hanging on to this?
Sure.
Surely I need to get this out here so that people understand, because everybody's asking questions. If Cy Walsh has a mental illness, that answers everything, and people can form a new opinion, think about this a different way.
Yep.
If Cy Walsh was high on drugs, then that's going to answer that speculation. Yep. But the thing is, I don't have any ability to answer speculation. All I've got is enough kindling to set bigger fires, because everything I've read can lead to mental illness or drug intoxication.
Yep.
If I publish it,
Yeah.
all I'm going to do is give both those camps, for want of a better term, more fuel.
More ammunition. And you pulled out a key point right there, and I want to expand on this because it's very important. You were doing that research and taking that down and getting that case of cramp in your hand in September 2015.
Yeah.
I know the articles you wrote about this wouldn't surface, though, until September 2016.
That's right.
So I just want people to think about that. That 12-month period, what happens with that information during that time?
Sat in a notebook, under lock and key in my desk drawer and inside my brain.
So let me just try and get some understanding around that. So you've got the pieces of this puzzle, and you're trying to put this together, and you don't want to prejudice one way or another, but you're sitting on this for a full 12 months before you can actually go public with this. Am I understanding this right?
You're 100% correct. I'm watching everybody else take lesser jigsaw puzzle pieces and put them together in configurations that I know are incorrect or I know are missing entire areas of the picture, and having them say to each other and say to the world, this is what it means. This is what happened. I'm hearing people hold court effectively in the court of public opinion on who and what Cy Walsh is, on what the case was, on how Phil died, on everything. I'm thinking to myself, you don't actually know, because you don't know about Greylands. You don't know about Stephen Trobiani. You don't know about this.
And this is where I'm going to, if you can hear that scraping noise, that's me pulling up a soapbox. Because I'm about to stand on this, and I'm going to take umbrage at this point, because I know the difficulty that must have been for you, because we've spoken about you having to sit on that information. And the reason I'm going to take umbrage is I also know the personal shots that you have taken over the years from this case, from those who think they've had all the pieces to put that puzzle together, from those who think they know, when you were talking to one of, and let's face it, you were a journalist, and as you said, in your opinion, possibly shouldn't have had that access to that information at that time. So you are one of, let's face it, a handful of people in this state who actually know the full story, intimately, every detail, every piece of evidence taken about this case that talks about Phil, that talks about Cy, that talks about the incident, and everything else that connects that together. And yet there are people out there, because of the emotive nature, and as I've said many times, the priority and the huge prospect this gets because of who this person was, can sit in the cheap seats and make commentary at you while you're on the field in the trenches doing the hard yards. And you don't have the ability just to fight back or shoot back, hey, I know the truth. Because as you said, you don't want to prejudice a jury from that nature. But I just want those people out there who've taken that liberty to have a pot shot at you about this to recognise that when you want to throw stones at someone who actually has all the information and you want to sit in those cheap seats, and for those people out there who might know who I'm talking about, if you want to throw commentary over the fence at someone who's trying their guts out on the field and you are just sitting in the stands because you don't have the ability to play the sport like the guy on the field is, you maybe want to have a look at yourself, because there's plenty of people that want to talk best on ground, and there's plenty of people who want to talk about, wow, we take it 1 week at a time and we work on the information we have and we do our best every day. That's great. But for those who are great at what they do on the field, I'd expect them to have some respect for those who play in a totally different sport that perhaps you don't have the ability to play in. That said, I'm now getting down off my soapbox because, Sean, I needed to say that, and I have sat on that for many episodes, because I know for a fact the place of integrity you stand, not just in this case, but every case that you've dealt with, the people I know that you've created relationships with because you've actually represented them through some of the toughest, most horrible, horrendous situations they've ever been in, and the regard that they hold you in because they know the true person you are, and they also know that you wouldn't talk half-truths and you wouldn't go off half-cocked. Now that I have that out of my system, and we're at the end of 7 boxes of paperwork, what now?
I'm grappling with the moral dilemma. My job is to inform the public of what's going on, but my job is to do so in a way that doesn't upset the court process. I have the biggest story, the story that everyone in the country wants. I'm the only journalist with the story that everyone in the country wants. Do I publish or don't I publish? That's where I'm sitting at this point.
So what do you do? Because clearly you've also got a boss that's going, Sean, what can we use here? What can we say? What do we do? It's not just you. How do you serve all those masters?
The only thing I can do at this point is, and like I said, it's 4:30 at this point. The registry's kicking me out. You finished? Yeah, I'm done. All right, good luck. Take care. Holding the heaviest notebook that I've ever held in my life, I tuck it under my arm and turn and start crossing Victoria Square and heading toward Weymouth Street where the Advertiser building is located. And I ring as I'm walking saying, can you get the editor and the sports editor and the managing director and anybody else who's available into the meeting room? We've got to have a conversation. We need to decide what we're going to do about this. And the editor says to me, okay, why? I said, well, you wanted me to get the declarations. I got them. And he was speechless. He said, yeah, come on in. We're going to have to figure out what we do next.
And to understand where this story goes from here, we will pick this up in our next episode. Until then, we want to thank everyone, of course, for coming along with us and listening to this, whether you've heard the broadcast on 5AA or you've heard the podcast on either iTunes and Spotify. Before we go any further, again, if you've heard anything through this that you may take concern with, or you have someone in a vulnerable mental state, please make use of the resources in your area. Here locally, the Acute Crisis Intervention Support Line on 131466, the South Australian Government Mental Health Triage Service on 131465. Please rate, review, give us any regard you like. Hit us with your feedback. We know this has been an emotive one and it's been quite decisive, and we welcome that, as we said, because it starts a conversation, and that's where we can get true value and understanding between individuals.
If anything comes out of this episode, we're only ever entitled to informed opinions, and now you have been well and truly informed.
Indeed. To give us that feedback, we'd love to hear it from you. You can do that at Just Lawful Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, at Just Lawful Pod on Twitter. You can, of course, follow Sean and all of his work with Adelaide's True Crime and The Advertiser at Sean Fuster on Facebook and Twitter. And as we always say, one more time, enjoy our work, but don't become our work. And we'll speak to you on the next episode of Just Lawful.